Ready to do this week's podcast?
Oh, no, I'm done with the podcast. I don't want to do it anymore.
What do you mean you're done with the podcast?
Well, the kids don't listen to it. They don't care. I'm not going to record it anymore.
Well, of course they care. How else are they going to pass?
Are there no revision guides? Are there no master classes? Are there no private tutors?
Many would rather fail than go there.
Well, then they should fail and decrease the surplus sixth form population. I've got marking to do anyway. I need to get on with it.
Come in and know me better, man. Woo man.
What's this in my classroom? What? Jesus?
Not Jesus. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Touch my robe.
COVID. Can't get too close.
Oh, fair point. Follow me then at a 2-meter distance, and I will show you Christmas's present.
Tom Grim, what are you doing? It's Christmas Day.
Oh, hello, Mum. I'm just revising for my exams.
Oh, you are as good as gold and better, but it's Christmas Day. You shouldn't be revising on Christmas Day.
Oh, well, I'm just sitting here refreshing the YouTube channel, hoping the new Little Lang Gang podcast will come up so I can pass.
Oh, darling, they've stopped doing those. There won't be any more episodes of that.
What?
Oh, Spirit, tell me if Tiny Grim will pass.
I see a seat in a reset class. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. I mean fail.
No. Oh, kind Spirit, say he will be spared.
Are there no revision guides? Are there no private tutors?
All right, yeah, I get it. Yeah, you're using my words against me. Thanks. Okay, fine, I'll record this podcast then.
Cracking conversation, analytical interpretation, and igniting imagination with the Little Lang Gang.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Little Lang Gang, where this week we're going to be talking you through Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol. With you today you have myself, Miss Graham.
You have myself, Miss Battiste.
And me, Mr. Grimmett, not Jesus.
Jesus, indeed. And to start us off, we're going to be doing our hot seat activity because we don't expect you to remember everything from Stave 3, but we do expect Miss Battiste to.
Oh, God.
So,
Yes,
Miss
we do.
Battiste, 30-second timer ready to go?
Yes.
You've got 30 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so Scrooge wakes up and he's waiting for the other ghost, but the ghost doesn't show up. So he's kind of like, what's happening, what's going on? He notices a light out in his living room area. When he goes out, it seems to be Jesus sitting on a giant pile of turkeys and Christmas presents and things like that. Turns out to be the ghost Christmas present. He asks Scrooge to touch his robe, and they go on to see other things in London. They show them all sorts of stuff in London, how great Christmas actually is. There's lots of food, there's lots of joy. Everyone's saying Merry Christmas. I'm running out of time. And then he takes him to the Cratchits, where we find out that Tiny Tim might die. And that's as far as I've got.
I see, it's hard to do.
It's much harder
You get
than
caught
it
up with the details.
You
of it, don't
do. There's so many
Maybe we
details.
realised Miss Gray was actually just incredibly talented. She did
Yeah.
do it seemingly at ease.
I
She's
won't
very
have
good at
it.
concising things, I guess, kind of
Yeah.
bringing everything down. So
I
sorry.
think good. No, you got all the way to the Cratchits, and
So-
the only bit after that is really Fred, isn't it?
Yeah, Fred and the other places. And Ignorance and Want.
Yeah, you have.
And the Phantom.
Yeah, so you've got. They
To
go
be
to
fair,
Fred's family.
Stave 3 is the longest one. She had the hardest job of anyone.
Alright, well, whatever. I attempted. I did good. What went well? I got halfway through. Next steps, talk faster.
Yeah, I don't know if you can talk faster, but.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, that was fast. What?
So yeah, they go to. After going to the Cratchits, they actually see 3 different places, don't they?
Yeah, they
in
see
the
miners,
darkness.
they see the lighthouse, and they see a ship.
And every
Yes.
single one is celebrating Christmas.
In the
Everywhere.
darkest of times, and then they go juxtaposing with that. Then they go to Fred's, which is a bright,
Jovial.
warm, jovial affair, isn't it?
And they're having a good
playing
time.
games.
They're having a good time. They're playing Blind Man's Bluff, and the guy is pursuing the sister.
Guys trying to grope the sister.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's
Hand
cheeky.
gestures don't convey over a podcast either. I'm sitting here he's after the sister.
Yeah, I'm not even going to describe what Miss Graham's doing, but it is completely inappropriate. So then after he wants to stay, doesn't he? But the guy's like, no, you got to come on, got to go. And then Ignorance and Want come out of his robes.
Well, yeah, because the ghost grows older and dies, effectively.
Because he only lasts one day. He's the present, so he dies.
Yeah.
Yes, and then after Scrooge witnesses Ignorance and Want, these 2 children that represent
Many different
The problems
many
of
different
society.
things, but
Yeah.
poor poverty essentially. Then he witnesses the final Phantom stroll along. Stroll along.
Stroll along. Where she's like,
Line.
right, mate? Yeah. I'm your final ghost. And that's me. Yeah.
All right, I'm the Phantom.
It ends on that really sinister tone of this team,
It
like
does.
turning, and there's the Phantom, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Super sinister Stave. Did pause that there for Mr. Grimmett to go, it's not a sinister
It
Stave.
really is like the most unsinister Stave of all.
Okay.
So can we just go over that again? How are you going to finish it better, Miss Graham, this time?
Warm and lovely Stave.
Yeah!
Okay, so we're going to talk about Scrooge and his
Are we
acquaintances.
doing a jingle?
We don't have a jingle. We don't have a jingle.
Here we go.
Miss Battiste.
Scrooge and friends.
Right. That's the jingle you're after, okay? Every
Happy?
week, even if Miss Battiste is not here, do we have to call her in just to do that jingle
I'll do it
to
via
please you?
phone next time.
Yes, good.
Okay.
Good. As long as Mr. Grimmett's appeased. Let's talk about Scrooge
Let's
and
talk
his
about
friends. I guess Scrooge here is a very different character than we've seen in Stave 1. In Stave 1, he's very like, do I have to do this, Jacob? He actually says, like, I'd rather take them all at once or not actually have to go at all. And the fact that he's looking for this ghost when he wakes up and he's like, oh, what's going to happen next? And it's almost an anticipation. Very Christmas morning-like. And it's not until he investigates it, he actively investigates, he goes into the other room and sees a light, which is interesting for Scrooge because he's been so passive. He's been such a passive part of society. He's been such a passive person, I guess, in everything around him, that the fact that he goes looking for this ghost, he's a bit scared with what he's met with, but he's looking for it.
Good. So he's showing that Dickens is showing his, just through his actions of actually walking from one room to the other, it's showing his change of character.
Stave 2, he didn't even open the curtain. This ghost
No,
did, and
the
he
ghost
was
did.
he was there.
Mhm.
This time he gets out of the bed
Yeah.
to seek
So
him out.
what does that suggest about the way that he sees this whole journey
I
then?
think it's a willingness, isn't it? It's a willingness to be taken now, because like the way I always view it, with Jacob Marley, he's like, you don't exist, this isn't real. He's dismissive. With the next ghost, he's nervous and apprehensive, a little bit like, but I am mortal and liable to fall. It's like, well, come with me then. This one, he's willing to go with and learn. And actually, I think weirdly quite enjoys himself
He does
in this
enjoy
one,
himself in
up until a point. And then, as we will say with Stave 4, I think it's a moment of he's willing to go, but because of fear. He's
It's
terrified.
yeah.
So he's like, yeah, sure, fine, I'll do whatever you tell me to do.
Okay.
Well, and I also think as well, Marley talks about like he's doomed to wander in his afterlife because he never wandered in life. So you actually have Scrooge wandering from the bed.
He's
So
got
this
more of
idea
a
that
purpose
he's
now,
going
rather
forward.
than just kind of wandering.
Absolutely.
He's going forward. He's going to somewhere, isn't he?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Seeking.
I think with Scrooge as well, he actively wants to be different by the time we get to this
But
stage.
he probably doesn't yet know
Well,
how
he does say
change.
to the ghost, doesn't he? Like, oh, I wish I could have a word with my clerk, or I wish I could have a word with the caroler.
In
That's
Stave
his
2, yeah.
Is it that Stave 2 or is it this one?
No, it's Stave 2.
Stave 2, though.
Oh. But no,
Yeah.
I swear, is it Bob in this one that he's talking? He's like, I wish I could have had a word with.
I think he says that when he
Stave
sees
2 obviously is
Fezziwig.
in Fezziwig.
Oh, right. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm making a
Oh, you
mistake.
weren't here with when we did last week with
No,
Stave 2.
I'm getting back up. Oh, yeah, no, that's fair enough.
But he sees Bob here, so in a sense, he kind of almost gets that. He can't speak to Bob, but he almost gets that met because then he gets to see how Bob spends his Christmases. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
But he wants to change, and like you said, I think it's just that he doesn't know how.
Yes.
It's like he's here and he's willing to go, and he's looking on all these things with the eye to change.
Yeah.
But at this point, he's just like, well, what do I need to do?
He's beginning to grow, isn't he? I suppose reflected in the imagery of this Ghost of Christmas Present, dressed in green, being the image of spring, which is how Father Christmas used to look before. I think it was before Coca-Cola, wasn't it? Changed it.
Literally
Um,
Coca-Cola.
Into red, and so the ghost is very free, especially with his hair. He's got his open robe, bare feet, very in touch with humanity, and so he's the perfect person to take Scrooge into London and show him how to change and be that catalyst for him.
And that ghost as well, like you say, he's grounded, he's barefoot, he's bare-chested, so he's very much exposed with the people whilst being warm. But he looks like Jesus, doesn't he? He's got a crown of holly on his head, which could be somewhat symbolic of the crown of thorns that Jesus wore. And his long hair and the beard and his
Very
manner, it's almost like
He's
Jesus.
peaceful as well. His
Peaceful.
empty scabbard, which is
Yeah,
the
there's
dagger holder. It's empty and it's antique, so it's like it's not been used in a long time, and there's no violence in him.
Yeah, which is gentle.
Whereas there was with Scrooge seizing the ruler and trying to attack that Carol at the beginning.
Absolutely.
So after that, he takes me to London, doesn't he? And there's a lot of pages about London.
There's like 4 pages just describing them going through London and listing everything they see.
Yeah, and they're positive lists. They're incredibly positive lists. Much like the things that he's sitting on in the room. It is just everything great about London, everything great about Christmas. And it is, of course, this idea that there's a lot of great things happening in London. It's just only happening for certain members of society. And it contrasts greatly with the fog and the dismal bit in the beginning of Stave 1. This idea that actually there's fantastic things in London. There's food, there's all sorts. It's not being distributed to the right people.
I just think it's lovely as well because I'm looking for it here, but they see all the things with the buildings and it's Christmas Day and he sees people sweeping snow, but they're like dancing or they're
playing.
They're playing, aren't
yeah.
they? They're throwing snowballs and it's a bright day as well, which could foreshadow Stave 5 because that is the Christmas yet to come, isn't it?
Yeah.
That he will end up experiencing, but it's a bright day despite that. And as they are, there was nothing very cheerful in the climate, but the people are cheerful.
Yeah.
The sky was gloomy, but for the people who were shoveling away in the housetops were jovial and full of glee. So they were thoroughly enjoying their Christmas. They're happy, despite the fact these people would, they're shoveling snow, they're potentially working, they don't have anything.
Well, which links to Christmas spirit. It's this idea that the society might be miserable, the actual climate might be miserable, but it's Christmas is what you choose it to be. So it kind of links into the point that they're all having a fantastic Christmas, regardless of their station, regardless of what they're doing. And then it goes to those 3 areas, doesn't it? It takes us on to the miners, the lighthouse, and the ship, which are very isolated moments, and these people are in isolation.
So it's just similar to that, isn't it? In the darkest places, they are celebrating Christmas still.
There's a light, or they're singing.
There's always a light in the darkness, like the lighthouse. It's symbolically there's a light. No matter how dark places get, there is still some light. There's still hope.
Which is
still Christmas spirit.
Still Christmas spirit.
Pearl in the oyster, flint, that kind of thing. That hope. But
Yeah,
I think
right.
as well, when I think about the Christmas spirit, and I've analysed the Christmas spirit in this particular part, there's this idea that Scrooge has isolated himself from that Christmas spirit. So even from the beginning, when we look at the Stave 1, there's a lot about the poultry, there's a lot about food in Stave 1. There's actually a mini list there about what's going on just beyond the fog.
Right.
And it's because Scrooge has chosen to isolate himself. So even in these places who are isolating because of their jobs and because of what they do for a living, they still have Christmas spirit. So it's kind of like pointing out that it is a personal choice.
Yeah, he could be happy if he wanted to, and he could still celebrate Christmas even alone, but he still decides not to.
Yeah.
So before they go to all those places,
He goes to the
he goes to the Cratchits, right?
Sorry, I forgot about them. Yeah.
Yes, well, now it's ruined. The whole
Oh,
thing's ruined.
sorry, I ruined it. My bad. Forgot about Tony Grimm. I mean Tim.
Yeah. God bless us, everyone. I wish I hadn't started doing that. I don't know why I did that.
Did our faces
Keep
register?
going.
Where's this going? Where's this going? Where's this going?
We'll bleep all of this out, just one long bleep.
And I love the Cratchits family because they're, they have nothing. And their outfits, the women's outfits, are decorated with ribbons because ribbons would be cheap and they can make their outfits look nicer. Or even, hold them together with these pretty emblems that really almost signify their poverty, don't they? And they're all mucking in, they're all helping out. So is it Martha's been out to work and she gets home and plays a trick on Bob when he gets home, and Peter's hoping to be employed?
Yeah, he's wearing one of his father's old shirts, which would have been a hand-me-down, which would have been a bit too big for him. And again, this idea that it's his best shirt.
He's chuffed with it. He's happy. He's like,
chuffed.
I've got Dad's old shirt.
My sister has to live with that. My sister's older than me, but smaller. And they had times I was hand me ups, and I was like, "Oh, you're so small. Here, you can have my old clothes now."
That's amazing.
But he's chuffed with it, and then Bob gets home with Tiny Tim.
I think it's really sweet how is it Martha who hides from Bob and says, "Pretend I'm not here, that I couldn't make it." And she hides, and then Bob comes in, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Martha couldn't make it." And she looks at her father being so unhappy, and she can't bear it. So she comes out and says, "I am here, really."
Yeah.
And it's just so lovely that they play fun games with each other. Unlike my family, my mum actually said the other day, she said, we don't play games at Christmas, do we? I'm like, no, we don't. It's really, actually really grim.
So what you're saying is your life is
Well, Grimmett.
Grim, yeah, it was just grim. Nothing happens in it. Yeah, darkness, like Scrooge. Like all Scrooges, like loads of Scrooges in the same house. But yeah, the Cratchits are the opposite. They play with each other, have games, and they love each other, and they can't bear to see each other a bit upset as well.
Yeah, and it's that thing, isn't it? They all make the dinner. So, you know, Peter's doing this and Martha's doing this, and is it Belinda? Is that one of the
Belinda's
kids?
one of the kids.
Yeah.
Belinda's mucking in. There's loads of them, but they're all doing their part. So when they sit down to that dinner, they are sharing in something that they've all done and they've all participated in.
That's right.
And there's warmth in that. There's warmth in a sense of they eat together, but there's warmth in the sense of they produced the little that they have. I quite like the line that, you know, they were all so full up and there was still food left on the table, and that wasn't the food that had been put there originally wasn't very much, but they were full. So it shows you just how little they eat day to day.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they've got the goose, haven't they? Because they couldn't afford a turkey, and a goose would be cheaper. So all of this, and then the pudding comes out. For me, it makes my mouth water whenever I read this, Stave, because it's so full of flavour and taste.
Yeah.
But they bring the pudding out that Mrs. Cratchit has been working on and slaving away on.
Because it wouldn't be cheap. Flour, that wouldn't be cheap.
It's just beautiful, isn't it? I mean, it's like, despite the fact they have no money, this is the Christmas you'd want to go to, isn't it?
They're broken teacups, aren't they? They're drinking out of them, broken goblets. But they compare them to goblets because they're all that they have. And it is this idea that they've all worked together and that they're working, which kind of contrasts Scrooge's idleness and how he feels like they're idle previously. They're actually working. They're working incredibly hard for what they have.
So they're not lazy.
They're
I
not
think
lazy.
Dickens is showing in the very centre and heart of the Stave, probably the middle of the book.
Yeah.
He's showing that poor people work hard and that they love each other.
By
They're
many
trying to
standards.
dispel and break those stereotypes that I think probably a lot of people had about the poor.
Well, they're probably myths perpetrated by the upper classes to almost
Justify.
alleviate themselves of any guilt. Well, they're lazy anyway. They're just not working hard enough. But literally any
Yeah.
working class person you see in this novel is working. Be that Bob and the Cratchits, be that just the average person on the streets, be that, you know, even like, and it's horrible in Stave 4, but the people that work for Scrooge after his death have been working hard to get his stuff out of the house.
Even that couple that are in debt to Scrooge that get out of it when he dies, they literally are like, oh my God, we're not going to have to pay this debt. Well, we are going to pay this debt, but we're going to have time to actually work and do it. So it's not like that they're saying they're going to get out of it. They're actually saying, like, if we were just given a little bit more time, we could do it.
That's right.
So it has that value.
And then they all sit
Yeah.
around the fire. They do that toast, don't they, to Scrooge.
Bob toasts Scrooge, much to Mrs. Cratchit's surprise.
I'm with Mrs.
and
Cratchit there. I would
dismay.
be like, if that was my other half, I'd be like, are you having a laugh, mate? Seriously? You're going to toast that guy on Christmas
Yeah,
Day?
the one that hasn't given you a raise in so many
But
years.
that in some ways solidifies with Scrooge that how good Bob is, that even on that day Bob is like, but we wouldn't have any of it if it weren't for the tiny little pennies that I earn.
Yeah.
And that must be really humbling to see a Scrooge, you know, knowing how little he pays him and he still thanks him for
That's
it.
right. And it is around this point that Scrooge actually asks what will happen to Tiny Tim.
And he bore a little crutch.
And he bought a little crutch, and then the ghost says that if nothing changes, then this child will die.
And we talked about the idea that children and that innocence specifically to Dickens, and the idea that he felt like the plight of the child is important. Childhood was something you just had to get through in this time period. And that it was really horrible for a lot of people. The infant mortality rate is just ridiculous.
When we talked in sociology, we were talking about the 1870 Education Act. That's when it comes in, and that's when we see education, you know, kind of for all.
So what was that? So in 1870...
It's literally called the Education Act.
So everybody started getting education in
Gosh, it's been a
1870.
while
One way or
since
another.
it's been a long time since I taught it, but what we kind of acknowledge there in sociology is that is the origin of childhood. So at that point, because children had to go to school up until, you know, at least a point, there is a point where a child is not seen as someone that works, that is not an income to a family or just another worker. That childhood is a separate institution and a time of life, because Dickens was writing before that. So actually, you know, how old is Tiny Tim? He's little,
He's
isn't
like
he?
8.
Eight. But really, you know, were he not, you know,
He's
poorly?
6 3/4. But yeah.
Were he not poorly, he'd be expected to be out at work.
Yeah, or at least doing something to add value to the family. And having a disability or having malnutrition causing him to be ill
Yeah.
would be a negative to the family, but they're still rallying around him.
And I like the way that he's just, he does bring good to the family though, doesn't he, Tiny Tim? Like when he goes to the cheer, the God bless us everyone, and the fact that when he goes to church, he hopes people see him and people will be reminded of who made lame men walk and blind men see. And so
Jesus.
Yeah, not you.
Yeah, not me.
Jesus did it. So he does bring so much good to the family.
I think he's an argument as well. I think we're spending a lot of time on Tiny Tim here, but he's not. You can never spend too much time with Tiny Tim.
He's a cracking bit of company. He's a great lad.
You can have some cracking conversation with him. He is an argument against the workhouses that are mentioned in Stave 1.
Yeah.
If people are saying that all the poor should go and have to work if they can't get a job, Tiny Tim can't. He'd die on the first day, bashing up stones and stuff like that.
He'd be trapped in the treadmill, like it would be a mess.
He'd get trapped, it'd be horrible.
Tiny Tim on a treadmill was
a horrible image.
But after that, obviously, so we see the Cratchits, then we have their dinner, the toast to Scrooge, which is very humbling. Then we see the miners, and then we go to Fred's house. And Fred's house, I think, is very similar to the Cratchits, except they've got that little bit more money. And I always maintain that, if we say things like, "Oh, how you celebrate Christmas, you're poor enough," then you see Fred's house, and I think he doesn't seem poor because what he maybe lacks in finance or money, he has in family, just like the Cratchits. So he's rich in other things, and even then, the money he does have, he's clearly put towards Christmas to celebrate with the people he loves. Yeah. So it actually does appear very abundant.
He hasn't just got family there as well. He's got friends too.
This Scrooge has friends.
Yes.
And I just think as well the idea that Scrooge actually enjoys himself.
He loves it.
He's part of that party. He's not actually they can't see him, but he is playing all the games. He's laughing. He is so different than what we had in the beginning. And he's actually very much let down when he finds out that the joke is on him. And I think Dickens sets that up brilliantly. We, dramatic irony, know he's going to fall there. We kind of know what's
in the game of yes and no, when Fred is describing, or they're asking, are you an animal?
It's an
he's
ass, isn't it?
Yes, I am an animal.
Yeah.
And there's loads of kind of...
He's a beast.
Yeah, negative things.
He doesn't have that basic... the thing that makes us human, which is that compassion to other people. That is comparing him directly to a beast. Yeah. So that's kind of an important bit as well.
And it's that point, actually, just before that Fred defends why he goes and speaks to Scrooge every Christmas. Because his wife doesn't understand why he does it, but Fred is really... really focused on every year, just going, just in case he changes. There's some good in him that Fred can see.
And he goes and he makes the homage because of Christmas.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that Christmas can make you do good things.
Yeah.
Oh, it does. And then at the end, it ends with ignorance and want. Those two ragged, horrible, words, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. Those really awful looking children who are, in many senses, terrifying. But
and Scrooge can't deny them. He can't deny they exist now. He's so entrenched in this idea of what it actually means to have poverty and that part of society, which at the beginning he actually says, that I do not know, when he's talking about are there no workhouses, are there no whatever. He's like, besides, I do not know. He doesn't actually know about that part of society. He's ignorant to it. And he can't be ignorant to these two children anymore, which is why he can't choke out the words that they're fine children.
So these children, they represent...
the parts of society, that parts of society that are, that the upper classes do ignore, that kind of affect the poor people. My classes have been talking about the idea that want and need are the same when it comes to being poor, because your needs are your basic things, and your wants should be your extras. I want an iPad for Christmas. I need to have food and water and sleep. Whereas for the poor, those wants, the things that they want more than anything else in the whole wide world, are common comforts, common needs, and common things like that. So it's kind of denied by those upper classes. That's why we have the idea of idleness. They think that they're lazy. They think that they want more than they deserve. This idea that the charitors say that we put together a small bit for the poor, and Scrooge still says no, because he thinks they have enough.
Yes.
Well, it's also the fact that, they say, but beware this boy, for on his brow it's something I've seen written doom. And it's the idea that,
the boy is ignorance, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's, everyone has their wants. In this case, in the poor, it is their bare necessities.
Yeah.
But ignorance is what causes want, and ignorance is what causes so many of the problems, if not all of the problems that Dickens is presenting in society. And Scrooge and many of the population were guilty of, really
100%.
guilty of ignorance. I mean, this novel does not present ignorance as bliss, does it?
Definitely not.
It's not. It's
Indeed. It's almost a sin. Ignorance is a sin.
Should be, yeah. Definitely.
To turn your head away from the suffering that's happening
others.
below you. To be,
Pretending
as
it
the
doesn't
ghost
exist.
says, to be the insect on the leaf, pronouncing the too much life of his brothers in the dust. It is a sin to look down and go, you don't deserve to live.
Well, you're
or
down there.
even to turn your head away and pretend it's not happening.
And it kind of that ghost as well, you know, saying these things. He starts as this jolly Father Christmassy kind of character, and by the end he's quite scary. I mean, I know the Jim Carrey version, that bit freaks me out. I can't watch it. But it is really like that. He does become this, you know.
I'm very brave. I can watch that.
Oh, you're tougher than I am.
very
But he becomes scary, doesn't he? And it's really like authoritarian, just as he's about to, you know. I know in Jim Carrey, you see him die, but in this case he just disappears because he has died and is replaced at the end of the stave by that phantom. And I think that's what I meant when I said sinister stave. Sinister ending to the stave. It's like, here's these lovely, warm, Christmassy images, and we're going to end with ignorance and want, and then you're going to turn, and there will be the phantom. And that's the thing that freaks him.
Absolutely. It gets worse for him, not better now. So
Yeah,
that's right.
absolutely. So it ends on this idea of, and here comes your fate. And the big ideas then. So we've kept it fairly, they're not too complex, these ones. Poverty
Yeah, absolutely.
and the plights and the needs of those who are destitute at this time. The Christmas spirit, I think, and family are really prominent themes in this stave as well.
Absolutely. The idea of faith as well kind of links in through all of those things. I think Dickens does a really good job of talking about religion in a way that's not so... I don't know, he subtly weaves it in almost every stave, that there's this idea of what it means to be Christian, and then there's how people are acting in the time period and how they're calling themselves Christian.
You were saying about the way that the ghost distinguishes between being Christian and saying you're doing Christian things, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's very important to Dickens not for people to think that just going to church on a Sunday
It's going to solve everything.
is going to solve anything. That is not, according to Dickens, what being a good Christian is. In fact, there is a part of that stave in which it's the ghost challenges the idea that people should go to church on the Sunday because it means...
and Scrooge says like, oh well, it's you that is trying to get them to go to church on Sunday and allowing people not to eat or something along those lines.
Because that's what happens if you close everything. Then there's nowhere for the poor people to get hot meals.
Yeah,
A lot of them wouldn't have ovens or ways of getting those hot meals. So you are being quite selfish and just everyone going to church and shutting everything down, which is what the Sabbath or the Sunday was used for just for like worshipping Christ. So the ghost says, no, that's not me doing that. That's people who have taken my name and used it for their own purposes.
yeah.
So Dickens is very much about being a good Christian. Is about doing good things. It's about
Acts speak louder than words.
Actions speak louder than words. Yes, exactly. I think out of the whole novel, it's about that. Actions speak louder than words.
It's not enough to say you're going to do something. You've got to actually do it.
You've got to do it. And the Cratchits do. They're a good family. They do nice things for each other. Tiny Tim is as good as gold and better. He's better than money. At the heart of this story, you have the message that actions are worth more than money.
Which again links into family and everything like that. It has quite a wholesome ending to this thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet we know that Scrooge needs to face the fire now. Like he needs to act, which is kind of what Stave 4 is all about.
Stave 4 will haunt him probably forever, won't it?
Indeed. Is this the end of the podcast?
It's not the end of the podcast, but you will hear why in a moment. And now we have a very special section for you all where we get to hear from Miss Goff, who used to teach at King John and abandoned us and left us for London. However, she's got a lovely little section here on Scrooge for you all to enjoy.
Hello, this is featuring Miss Goff today talking about Dickens and crafting character for the Lit and Lang Gang. So by the time Dickens had written A Christmas Carol in 1843, he had drawn in a large following of fans. With his appearances in Victorian society, he often liked to read out his serialised instalments of novels, and he very much designed his novels with his readership in mind, creating alternative endings sometimes, or changing aspects of the content in light of their opinions, as he used to put them in like newspapers every week. I think it was weekly or bi-weekly, and they'd read them and they'd literally lap them up. And he was very fond of publicly reading his works to crowds, so I think it's worth keeping in mind that a lot of his works are designed to actually be listened to and read aloud, and I think he is keeping that in mind as well when he is crafting his characters. So in terms of structure and writer's craft, one can identify the cinematic quality that pertains to the novella. It is filled with moving images, which is particularly prominent when Scrooge is shown the spirits. One example of that is the shifts that we see in the Ghost of Christmas Past, changing from old to young. Through the narrator's witty quips, who is arguably a character in his own right, Dickens demonstrates his apt ability to characterise his characters, bringing the cinematic quality to life for his readers, both old and new. When I consider this text, I very much view Scrooge as a kind of caricature of capitalism. So caricature is something that it comes in pictures and imitations, and they're notorious for hyperbolic and striking features, often for comic and grotesque effect. And this is notably present within Dickens's novel, especially with the description of Scrooge at the start of the novella. So I'm just going to give you a quick quotation for that. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shrivelled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red. So not only with that kind of quotation there, but there's also that extended metaphor that we see at the beginning with weather, and it kind of pervades that description of him as a covetous and miserly figure within society, and readers are effectively asked to dislike him for dramatic effect. So I think the narrator is inviting us to that, and obviously if we think about the narrator being a character, we could argue it's a mouthpiece for Dickens and delivering that didactic message to people at Christmas. So now to return to this idea to caricature, within all of Dickens's works there are meticulously crafted characters who either have a deliberate name, think Scrooge being like a screw, something quite hard and stubborn, and it was actually a common 19th century term, slang for miser. And I'm going to allude to that a little bit later in this podcast recording as well. So in terms of people having deliberate names, they also have physical characteristics which extend that characterisation. So this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about physiognomy. So physiognomy is a person's facial features of expression, especially in regards to character. Essentially, it is the relationship between a person's outward appearance and the person's personality. Now, there is actually evidence to suggest that Dickens took physiognomy very seriously. It was an indirect way of portraying characters and links very nicely to the notion of caricature in A Christmas Carol. So the quotation I mentioned earlier about the coldness that surrounds Scrooge and the fact that he also has red eyes, thin lips and a wiry chin really enables readers to picture a character that is at once condescending and isolated. If we think further about the physical features of red eyes and thin lips, we can almost imagine something kind of grotesque or monstrous, but also on the brink of death. And I think when I discuss this novel and look into this, I think the fact that even when Marley says that he's been there, he's like, Marley's 7 years dead, and he's appeared to Scrooge on many a night like this before, but Scrooge is only just being able to see him now. It could be argued that he is close to death and he needs that one last chance to be redeemed. So I'll now link this kind of concept of the red eyes and the thin lips and the characterisation of Scrooge to the four basic elements of the human body that was popular in the Renaissance, so much so that it was considered a science, and it is actually based on the humoral theory of Hippocrates. Hippocrates stated that the human body contains four distinct humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. If you would like to do some further research into this in accordance to what I'm going to say, you can look up the four humours and medieval theory, and it will give you some kind of insight into that further if you'd like to look at it. So ever since the Renaissance kind of popularisation of the four humours. It has been something that writers have perhaps indirectly drawn upon in the formation of a character during their writing process. A few things are very striking in relation to this humoral theory. Can't get my words out. Scrooge has the physical feature of thin lips, which is linked to the characteristic of being stingy and bad-tempered. The humour it is likely that Scrooge most resembles is black bile, in the sense that he has a melancholic temperament, he's solitary, and he has qualities of being cold and dry, and isolating himself from other people. If a character had one humour that dominated, they were considered sick or diseased. I know you're also studying Shakespeare with Macbeth, so you might want to have a little look to see if you can find any humour, four humours within Shakespeare's works too. It could be argued then that Scrooge's excess of solitariness has made him something bitterer than the worst weather conditions of hail and rain and sleet, something that warns all human sympathy to keep its distance. Whilst this is all relative, I've gone slightly off tangent here with the theory side of things. All good things that you can consider for your critical understanding of the text, and it is definitely not something you have to have in your responses, but it is certainly food for thought for you. To return to the novella then, just in case readers fail to recognise the importance of the physiognomy of Scrooge with his physical containments, Dickens provides readers with a literary foil in Bob Cratchit, or perhaps even the likes of Fred, Scrooge's nephew, with his ruddy glow. When Bob is released from the melancholic confines of the prison-like counting house for the Christmas holidays, he emblematically celebrates his freedom in a burst of bodily kinesis. So if you look at him, there's kind of this activeness with the Cratchit family where everything's happening at once. And look at those passages. I haven't got the quotation to mind here. I'm thinking about the Braving Ribbons when they're talking about the turkey and then the goose and they're having that feast. So have a look at the movement that they have there where they're celebrating. That's a real contrast in terms of characterisation for the Cratchit family if we can contrast that with Scrooge's character. Earlier in my discussion of Scrooge then, I briefly alluded to the meaning of Scrooge's name, and I'm going to throw a key term at you for this: aptronym. An aptronym is a person's name that is regarded as amusingly appropriate to their occupation. It is a personal name that is aptly or peculiarly suited. So to give you some insight into the aptronym of Ebenezer Scrooge, I'm going to delve into some etymology. So Ebenezer is obviously his first name, and it is of Hebrew origin and roughly translates as the stone of help. This is reinforced through the narrator's description of him as hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had snuck out generous fire. It's almost as if in this choice of name, Scrooge was destined to be good, whether he liked it or not, and that's a deliberate choice by Dickens, perhaps we could argue. Even after the neglect in Scrooge's childhood, which may have encouraged his isolation in adulthood, he was bound to have that epiphany which forces him to change. Moreover, if we think about the idea that he's destined to be good whether he likes it or not, we want to link back to the fact that his name means stone of help. Readers are given clues that he has the potential for good, but he requires some assistance in order to achieve that. As solitary as an oyster, the hardness of an oyster shell encases a pearl, or perhaps deeper wisdom within or deeper capacity to be able to change. So the hardness of the flint as well may appear to be Scrooge's main attribute that he kind of lets other people see when he talks to them and acts the way he does in society. But it has the ability to bring warmth if we think about a flint being able to spark fire. Now to turn to his surname Scrooge. Scrooge is based on the archaic English word scrouging, which essentially means squeezing. So think of the squeezing, wrenching, grasping, covetous old sinner that we see at the start of the novella. And it could also be seen as a phonetic pun on screw, which was a common 19th century slang term for a miser. So a miser is just someone that hoards money to themselves. Now, scrouging and screw do come from the same linguistic root, so we can see the parallels in his name here. And I thought it was interesting to delve into some of that etymology there, so that you could see that his name is a deliberate craft as well. And he Dickens is definitely thinking carefully about those choices of name when he is writing his character, and he does the same with his kind of characterization of their physical features and the physiognomy that we've spoken about already. And the reason I know that he is quite good at this kind of choosing of names and deliberately choosing names that are quite comic or appropriate is because he does it in other novels as well. So one of my favourite examples of that is an aptronym from Dickens's novel Bleak House, which is written about 10 years after A Christmas Carol. And he's got a character called Mrs. Jellyby. Now, she is a philanthropist, and that is someone who seeks to promote the welfare of others. And she devotes all of her time and energy to kind of this mission in Africa that she actually forgets about her own family. And she becomes distracted by it, she neglects them, she ignores them. And her house is essentially like jelly. Everything is everywhere, lopsided and chaotic. She's a very frantic character. And you can see that with so many of his other characters in his novels too. So in terms of checking out some of those characters, it might be good for you to think about those writers' intentions a little bit more, and to see the typicality across his novels. And this is definitely something I'd recommend if you are considering studying literature at A-level, as the typicality of features is something that you look more at length in when you do that study there at that higher level. And it, for now, is just a nice challenge for you to have a look into, and it shows that perceptiveness of writers' intentions. So this has been a very quick kind of podcast recording on that, but I hope that it has given you some understanding of kind of the characterisation and craft in terms of physiognomy and aptronyms, and I hope that some of you will find that useful and start to apply that to your responses. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed that special feature from Miss Goff. Gosh, we miss her so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Grimmett, that is not very Christian, nor is it very good in Christmas spirit.
I do, I miss her. She reminds me, I was going to say Tiny Tim.
She reminds me of Tiny Tim, because
Yeah.
she's so little.
She was always smiling and always doing lovely things for people.
God bless us, everyone.
God
Bless her, everyone.
God bless Miss Goff, everyone.
And it's so nice to hear her voice again. Thank you so much for listening. Tune in next week where we will be discussing Stave 4. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Little Gang.